So today we're talking about group work. And generally,
Now isn't there a little stereotyping going on in this picture?
oh yeah, this is from the Hangover movie. So a lot of people, they're all from their 20s, right? They come up and they'll do all kinds of fun things. The plot of the movie right there,
Okay.
and it's a project. There's another plot giveaway. But generally, group work is not the favorite thing that students do. I know when I went through undergraduate and graduate work, it was not my favorite either. But I didn't have, the texts, devices, and Google Hangouts, and some of these electronic options to meet either. So we had to actually make a plan to go meet at a room in the library, and if nobody was there or if somebody didn't make it or find it, it was a huge pain in the butt, right? And yet we recognize that they are good for these things, even if only a little bit, and so we keep doing that because there are all of these skills that we want our students to have, because in our discipline, these are really important things, right? And we don't generally in academic work say, oh, today's activity is going to be about one of these things, that today's activity or whatever is about the academic content that we're trying to cover. So this is just kind of an extra thing. We have a lab actually on some of the software providers at Columbia College who looked at the last 100 years of grading, and he found out that we only grade, the last 100 years, teachers only grade on about 25% of what we grade on is academic skills. The other 75% are things like showing up, being nice, not being a jerk, showing enthusiasm, all of these sort of things that we want our fields to have, but it's not directly an academic knowledge. So, what do you want to talk about today on the topic of group work? I'll write some things down. Would somebody like to start? Say who you are and a question that you might have or what you'd like to get across. What you'd like to talk about.
So Kevin,
Yep.
I'm an instructional designer over at LEADA School of Ed. I would like to talk about sort of like co-collaboration or co-creation of materials in a group. So what are some of the options available?
All right. And then on either side, collaboration and creation.
My name's Kenny. I'm a grad student in the Kinese department. Just looking for best practices. I've mainly worked with large lectures, so group work is usually not an option, but I'd like to know if anyone has used group work in a large lecture.
Yeah, that's a hard spot, right?
Angela, I'm in biomolecular chemistry. I teach a senior level lab class, so group work is kind of all the time. But I'm always looking for more ideas. But I do have thoughts on sort of long-term partnerships that help to make that work. I don't have any ideas.
I like that though, the long term, and we're gonna put sustainability or.
Well, I guess tied to that, so we do sort of collaborative, they have collaborative projects, so research goes they have to make. So we've been trying to make that better. This semester we're gonna try having small meetings with the groups beforehand, so the TAs will get together. So kind of ways to not only put groups together, but also sort of support them, so they're putting something that faculty members will like to look at the end of the semester. So how do you sort of support that group work?
All right, I'm putting down pacing and scaffolding. Good. Cliff.
Yeah, I'm working with John in the academic technology group. I'm part of the learning team. I do a lot of training in Canvas, so I've shared some Canvas knowledge about group assignments and group discussions, but I'm just here to hear how is it really working? Is it working out as advertised, or what are the pitfalls that we maybe didn't know about that are proving to be some challenges. So best practices, but also how do I need to be presenting it to your peers?
All right, I'm gonna put down using the LMS,
That's true.
which is Canvas. Very good, Warren.
Lauren, I work with language educators, do a lot of professional development with them, and last summer did a course where I was using the collaboration feature of Canvas, and the collaboration wasn't quite working the way I wanted it to. We do lots of different kinds of group work in face-to-face, but I'd like to get a better handle on how to do that within the LMS.
All right, Canvas collaboration. Poorly named.
Yeah.
I'm Eric Tolza. I'm an instructional designer with UW Extended Campus. And I guess broadly, group work is just an interest of mine. I was a returning adult student at Madison a few years ago and had to do many group projects with the current generation. And, so I
Say no more.
Yeah, the first one used to be my background on my computer.
Okay.
And I mean, I had to put page number on peer reviews. So it became a real big passion. I wanted to learn about how we do group works better, projects better, and stuff like that. And to be real specific, I like to kind of learn about what people are doing to kind of deal with like the free rider in a group project.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of people say do peer reviews or researchers do peer reviews, but this past May, we kind of put on a faculty symposium. And surprisingly, we did a workshop on group work, and we heard from faculty that they don't like peer reviews. Like half the faculty prefer not to do one. So I'm just kind of curious to see what people kind of did to, encourage people from, not dropping off from a group project.
James,
Yeah.
I would like to hear what their rationale was on that. If you can remember. Later or afterwards.
All right.
Hi, my name is Claudia. I'm a visiting international student here for a semester, a returning adult student after 8 years. And so I would like to look at this from two perspectives. From my professional experience as someone who gives trainings in medical education, how to incorporate more group work. And from a second perspective as a student, so understanding group dynamics, especially that now I have a lot of projects coming up. So how to deal with the free rider, for example.
Is there a lot of group work in med school?
It's during the trainings, mostly I've worked a lot with pairing. They're all healthcare professionals, so it's really hard to get that group dynamic going, but I'm interested to see some ideas.
I'm going to add the culture of education, because there's something about, I was always taught traditionally, it's do your own work, keep to yourself, do not learn from other people.
Right? Yeah.
It's personal individual assessment. Back row, Margaret.
Hello, I'm Margaret. I work with John here in Active Teaching Lab. I'm a grad student in the iSchool and have a career as an instructional designer. So everybody's kind of said what I was thinking, and certainly how to use group work to perhaps even assign roles so that people know who's a project manager, who's the scribe or whatever, who's gonna, because without those roles, to your point, Kevin, that this generation doesn't even know what those roles are.
Yeah, where do we start?
Where do we
Who
start?
does what?
And then they all wait
Right.
to the
For
last.
the leadership to emerge.
Yeah, well, they
That's
wait to
chaotic.
do the work to the very last minute, so there's no time to review it. So there ought to be some mechanism to get the groups to go through review cycles like we would in, industry.
Sid.
I'm Sid Freitag. I work in academic technology with John. I also work on programming for instructors. So I'm here to listen, just find out what questions, interest people have.
My name is Sarah Benedict-Sawodio. I work with the Division of Continuing Studies and also teach ESL to our international students that come through DCS. And yeah, a lot of these things, my kind of main interest was, we do a lot of group work in ESL classes. And I struggle with sometimes students procrastinating on like bigger projects, which they in particular need help with because there's not only the content, but the language component. And then also the kind of as in the instructor role, like how I can support them along the way, whether I set up a timeline for them and we do check-ins, but making them efficient, because I feel like sometimes group work can get really messy. And then if they're not kids, I think they sometimes act like kids. If the students aren't prepared, then it seems really inefficient for me to be checking in with them, but I want them to check in to make sure they're on track and kind of help with maybe some of the problems they're dealing with. So I'm just kind of wondering how that can work.
Yeah, let's actually start there because efficiency is probably one of the other big reasons that we do not do a lot of group work, right? It's much easier for me to just stand up here, follow some slides and talk at you. I don't have to worry about integrating any of these social dynamics of what might happen when you start to interact with each other. I may manage the chaos very nicely if you're just listening quietly, right? There is no chaos. It is a very efficient way for me to give information to you and for you to write it down or at least hear it, if not see that and decode it and such. And once I start saying, okay, start interacting with each other and show each other what you're learning, now all of a sudden I'm putting a lot more work on the students, right? And students are humans just like us. We don't necessarily like having work put on us. And the culture is also one where in medieval times, early universities, the head master, or I'm thinking the religious institutions, bishop or whatever, would speak and everybody would just quietly write things down. And it was very much a absorption style thing. There wasn't a lot, and it was discouraged. The arguing back and forth of what does this mean to you and what does this mean to me? And the university's been that way for a long time. So the research shows us that when we have students reflect on their learning, ask each other, challenge each other with this, that the learning goes way up, but it's also because the work that they're putting into it goes way up. And that's hard.
Yeah, I mean, so for those of you who are in the teaching roles, or maybe just more as instructional designers, you're at least embedded more deeply in an academic department or school. Is there any kind of entity, an office, a person, a point of contact where that is responsible for like teaching students kind of project management skills? I mean, this one, because this is fascinating. This notion that they don't know what the roles are, they don't know how to do work ahead of
Yeah, and
time.
how would they know, Cliff? Because many of them have not been in industry where we see project management principles more broadly applied.
Sure.
And,
And
so I wish we did have.
If as an instructor I wanted to incorporate this more, it'd be nice if I could say, okay, to be able to do this, you are all obligated to 5 hours worth of check-in at this place. You need to go sit down with some university designated, I don't know, somebody in my department who's the official group project manager teacher, teaching people how to be part of the group.
And give them some credit for going and doing it,
Yeah,
and have that be the first
maybe
lesson.
that's the first week of your class.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Cliff.
Well, and then there's this idea of scaffolding, right? The multiple check-ins, right? It's a reminder that, oh yeah, next week we have to have this done. And in 2 weeks, this is due, and what we do next week will help set the foundation for what we do in 2 weeks. And if we can, again, that's a lot more work for the instructor than saying, you need to give me a paper at the end of the semester.
That's right.
I'm done.
Good luck. I don't know of anything like that exists. I would say I try to build it into the class as much as possible. And since I have a lab class and it's kind of unusual, we meet twice a week for 3 hours. So I have 6 hours of time a week. For the second half of the semester, they do sort of a research project, which is going to go into a poster. So I actually have 3 in-class periods at the end of the semester that are purely for group work. So it's 9 hours of class time. They have a couple different things they can be working on with different groups. So I guess I try to not only enforce how important it is, but I'm also like, be here, and then myself and the TAs are your resources, so we can kind of help them. And that has worked reasonably well so far. I've done it 3 or 4 semesters now. But this semester we're gonna start actually having, because a poster is a complex thing, which I have told them, like, here's what a poster looks like, here's kind of the structure, but it's hard. Like there's simple things like layout all the way up to like how much information do you put on it and how is it structured. So this year we're actually gonna have, we have like 9 groups. So each group will meet this 3-hour period. We could have meetings all class. They're gonna meet with the 2 TAs, I think, and like have a little conference. So that way they have to come to the conference, but then like really kind of hopefully put it all together. And then sort of related to the check-in thing, the research days where they're collecting data, it's always been like suggested, put together a method, suggested, put together this. I'm gonna make it not,
Strongly
it won't even be
suggested.
for points, it'll be like, do this now.
Yeah.
So I think definitely scaffolding has to be part of it, and I think if it's a really, because there's differences between like small in-class group work and then like big project, and I think if a big project is important, I think it probably is helpful to have class time for it, because there's usually tons of like learning objectives that are in that group project. So, taking out some content and devoting more towards that project, I think that helps, because those are the things where they're usually like, oh, now I get it because I put it together. But so I guess we do that for them. Or like but it's not formalized. I don't want to
You
put,
have to.
but I don't assign roles because I don't want to babysit them too much because they're seniors. So it's balance. Well, and that's the thing, that could be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we're a little different because all of our programs are online, but I know, so we just can't have students all meet together at a certain point, but what our faculty do, and we encourage them to do at like the start, especially if you're like a course that's early in the program and you have group projects, we encourage them to just give students resources on this is how you work well in a group project, or just make them aware of these are the things that you should be doing to ensure success, to kind of take a step back and just think about like, how do I act as a group or a group member? Yeah, so we do that for our students.
And the online space is sort of an interesting one, right? Because, my own experience as a student, there was no online. It was you had to meet together at one spot. Do you have them use things like Blackboard Collaborate, or do you let them sort of work with whatever tools that they're already familiar with and let them come up with that?
Yeah, I know we use UCU quite a bit.
Okay.
So that was one program that we can use, and it's just like a paid service where students can come together, they can share documents, they can have meetings there, they can upload videos, they can create a project within UCU. So they'll use something like that. I know Blackboard Collaborate Ultra is used, and I know some just have them use like Google Docs for as far as communication and stuff like that too.
And I think that's maybe another hint or whatever is giving them a workspace. So in Canvas, for example, you can set up groups, and then once they set up groups, they have basically their own Canvas course. They can set up their own discussions, they can share files, they can edit pages there. So that is at least a space that is identified as do your work here, right?
Yeah, and when you kind of think about picking a tool for a workspace, I think it's important to think about one, where they can work, but two, how can you pick a tool that allows you to track work? Because you want to be able to see if you're a faculty member what students are doing what in a group project, especially if you get to the end and the student says, well, this group member didn't help out at all. If you use something like Google Drive, it's very easy to go see who made changes, who added, who removed stuff.
Who participated?
Yeah. So when you think about a tool just for a workspace, you want to think about the other end too, to help faculty.
And I'm going to add familiar as well, right? So I'm not familiar with UCU. Is that an easy thing for them to get?
No, it integrates into like Canvas or V12. It's just it's an LTI integration, and it's just like a page that you kind of hop into.
Okay. Easy enough to figure out. They figure it out pretty well.
Yeah, but we've had hit and miss with UCU. We have some faculty like it a lot, some don't like it. It's kind of really your style.
But how do the students feel?
Yeah,
That's the question. Because
Yeah.
if you give them a workspace and it's weird and hard to learn, and they've got to figure it out, and then they've got to teach each other how to figure it out, that can be a real turnoff for doing the work. And they're spending most of their mental energy on the structure rather than on the content. Which it's good to be able to have those problem-solving things. That's part of being in a group, is solving unforeseen problems. On the other hand, you don't want it to be too hard. With Google being used by over 95% probably 98% now of K-12 schools, it's a thing that our students coming in generally all have basic knowledge and comfort with. And left to their own devices, they will probably end up using that on their own. And again, it's trackable as long as they do the misguided you thing. And, but yeah, explain to them. The other thing I said for the scaffolding, remind them that it builds on this. So what we did in class last week, you take that and apply it towards the thing that's due next week. And this helps them also, this is a great learning science thing because it helps them reflect on past learning, which again, it increases, every time you can make a connection to things that you've talked about, that learning goes up. Margaret.
I just wanted to add, I took 2 courses last semester, and one course was a lot of group work. And I think the way the instructor was managing to make sure that everyone was contributing is that you would have an assignment due that was part of the group project, you see. So she'd give you some questions on the readings. You had to submit that. And then she would say, okay, now do some group work. And it was built upon this submission. So that's one way to at least get content submitted from everyone. And then you'd have a better idea when you see the final product. And then I had another class, and so this is just more like a tip or trick, and that is be sure when you create a group that you put enough people in the group and not too many. So I don't know, it depends on what your expectations are, but I had a group with only 2 other people, and those 2 other people like never really talked to me. I mean, I didn't take it personally or anything, but you know, you're supposed to have this big discussion, and they would log in on Tuesday. Well, it flips over right Wednesday, right? So I was having a discussion with myself just so I could get the minimum numbers of posts in to the discussion. Well, that's not, that's.
But those are the rules, and you have to follow the rules, right? So,
Right.
Were you actually answering yourself? Or
Well, I would raise some really wonderful intellectual questions and then answer them, Cliff, and, you know, so you don't.
Question, Margaret.
Yeah. So you got to make sure that your groups are an appropriate size and that people know what their role is, not just to talk to yourself, you know.
And I think the scaffolding and also group size is super important, not just up with the big projects, but the small ones like
Yeah.
that. So last week when the university shut down, I decided to do an online group project. 'Cause, you know, that's 6 hours of class time. No, it was something we were gonna do in class anyway, which was like a short writing, you know, activity where they kind of do some brainstorming and then talk about it and then do a draft. But I think scaffolding, it worked to varying degrees. They were off the week. So, but most people did respond. But part of what I did is made it sort of a ungraded quiz to start, which was the like brainstorming part, so they could get up to their own draft. And then I decided Canvas groups are pretty awesome because they just auto-populated a bunch of groups for me. And then I went into each group and I made a Google Doc in the Collaborate tab so I could put instructions in it. And also so I could have access to all of them. And so like the second half was they all had to put their drafts in, each using a different color so you can see who was who, and then comment on each other's, and then as a group kind of put the final draft together. And I think there were 7 groups and 3 got all the way to the final draft, which is not the best, but I wasn't super clear with deadlines, so I didn't totally blame them. But it was kind of cool to be able to see. Everyone did the first half with the colors and the comments, and so, you know, instead of just throwing them in, like put a draft and then comment, they got to have the scaffolding part of doing something on their own. So I think that helpful, even on a tiny project.
the scaffolding, breaking it into pieces, that also lets you set multiple deadlines because really, to your point, Margaret, one of the hardest things is to get started.
Right.
And if there's no incentive for me as a student to get started before the night before it's due, then I'm going to wait till the night before it's due. One of our repeat contributors, Morgan Gernsbacher, talks about this with discussion. She has things due every day, and she'll say, for this part of the discussion, by this deadline, you need to do this. By this next deadline, the next day, you need to do this. And she'll have these multiple things, and that way you don't look back and say, I've got to have this stuff done by next week, but nobody's responded, so I can't respond to their response.
Mhm.
And then, unless you get in like 5 minutes before the class starts, and then they finally added something usually useless that you have to then respond to. So getting those deadlines, getting people actually just started, give them an assignment that is due right away to start.
Well, kind of related to the group size issue, if you do that, and then there's certain people in each group that aren't meeting the deadlines, you pull them out, make a new group. Now they're on their own track, so that the other groups aren't like waiting for the 1 or 2 people that are. So I think my groups were like 6 or 7, because I didn't want to micromanage too
And let's
much,
talk
but
about,
I pulled a bunch of people out.
So you put them in what we just might call the slacker
It was
group.
group 8.
And then what, and then what happens to group 8? There's no leadership, or does a
I mean,
leader?
there was no leadership to begin with, because it was all like just post something
Oh.
and then respond to somebody
Oh,
else.
I see.
But I did, once I created group 8, I was like, hey, group 8, just so you know, you're in a new group now because you didn't keep the deadline. So I did sort of let
Oh.
them know. And that got, I think, like 5 of them.
That got 'em moving.
Yes.
let's
All
talk about choosing groups, and because this leads
Yeah.
directly into that. Now, what Morton Gernsbacher would say is, and sorry, I talk about her a lot, but she impresses me a lot. So she'd say that she initially chooses the groups, and then at the half of the semester, she lets the groups reassess and choose their own people, friends, whatever. And she's found, I think she's done research on this, that the students who love group work tend to group together, and the students who hate group work also tend to group together, and they're both much more satisfied. If you hate group work, you will enjoy group work more if you're with other people who hate group work. And you'll do a better job than if you're with people who love group work and you hate group work, And it's kind of, there's something about the birds of a feather. They still manage to get stuff done, but in a way they're free of that person who's like, we need this now so I can, change it. And
Or it's a
you need
group
to
full
do
of those people.
Or you're full of those people, and so you're just
so
one of those,
everybody-
you're comfortable.
And everybody's contributing, and so you're just like, okay.
How about, create like a survey that helps, quick personality test.
And it
So-
depends on the type of group work you're doing. Like if it's a
Yeah.
quick, you probably don't want to spend too much time doing that, but if it's a group project, then you definitely want to.
Something that's gonna be a semester long type of, it's having it, like 5 questions, and then that helps you as
Yeah.
instructors say, okay, I'm gonna put them in A, B's, and C's, or however you wanna call the categories. The dolphins, doves, and eagles.
The absolute takeaway so far for me, and please fix this if I'm not getting it right, is the minimum would be 4 people in a group. Because otherwise you might have too much slacking for anything to happen. And then to have some sort of starter activity that all of the students do independently, and then your group work builds off of that starter content. Is that what I'm getting?
I think it's more effective that way, because I think especially if it's like a
That's
discussion or something, I think there's that like fear of being the first person to post.
Or there's, you want to be the first so that
Right.
You don't have to, right?
Well, yeah, if you're the first person, then you don't have to like say something in addition to that's different.
Yeah, all the easy low-hanging fruit is right there for you.
It gives them a chance to like collect their thoughts and like do whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't, that's how we ideally do things as instructors.
But I think with the size, you want to consider the task that, I think that's going to kind of help answer your question about how big does this group need to be. And maybe if it is something that can be done by 2 or 3 people, maybe that's just not a good candidate for a group project. That's something that we talked about, is just think about, is a research paper or something that's really good as a group thing? Is there a better way assessment you can kind of design? So I think,
And there's also something about the online space versus the face-to-face space. In a large lecture, you can't have 8 people in a group because, you've either got this line of people that you're like, hey, what do you think back there? But then, or, how do you set that up? So small groups of 2 or 3, I can deal with this, and this, having a conversation. or the person sitting in front of me and myself. And that might be the best we can do in that. But, and then there's also, if you get 9 people in a group, that's fewer groups for you to have to grade, right? So good, you've saved yourself 10 times of the amount of work. Or whatever they do. But it's also a really good chance for people who aren't involved to stay uninvolved. And, there's less accountability in the larger groups.
Is that where the roles could come in, where each person has a specific task to do, and then if it's a year-long or semester-long kind of thing, you could rotate those roles, so everybody is a leader at some point.
Yeah, let's talk about what Margaret, you had talked about roles. What are some of the roles that you've seen?
Well, I mentioned project management because somebody's got to come up with a schedule of tasks and deadlines and milestones, just as we do in any project. And so you really do need someone with those leadership skills. But I'm looking at your display and I'm seeing, keeping people on track. That doesn't always have to be just the project manager.
Mm-hmm.
It could be somebody whose job is, hey, let's make sure we're focused, make sure we're answering the questions. But you always, and another role might be an editor. Not everybody knows how to write. And you really need someone on your team that's got an eagle eye for editing the content, the final draft. And that's a big job, and the formatting of the document. So you always have one person do that. So that's a really important role.
I think research.
Research, yeah.
I sent a document out yesterday that has a link to some of these.
Oh, good.
Pedagogic, teaching online pedagogic repository.
Thank you for pointing that out. We've added this to the activity sheet, which
Is it on?
I hope it's there as the link.
I don't know. I didn't see it. I don't think I got it to you in time.
Is it the university?
Yeah, it's the Teaching Online Pedagogic Repository, topr.online.ucf.edu.
What is it?
topr.online.ucf.edu.
All right, so the University of Central Florida is actually a really great resource.
And so I went to them first. So if
Yeah.
you just search group work, it'll come up.
All right, we will add that to the activity sheet.
One word or 2 words for this. It's group discussion strategies, the article.
There's use role play.
So I think it was group versus strategy, not with the strategies. There it is.
There it is.
And this is, they have a nice chart down there that shows all the different roles.
All the possible roles. There you go.
Hey, look at that. Margaret, can you add that to the bottom of the activity sheet? Or any of you, can you add that to the bottom of the activity sheet? And for Claudia and, I forget the name. Sarah, at the top of your activity sheet, you will see that there is a link to get into our Canvas course. And it's a self-enrollment thing, so feel free to jump in. The reason to do that is because you'll have a digital copy of the activity sheet here. And we're going to add notes to it. These links work, the ones on paper, of course, in as much as you want. They won't work. So you can try that. It is yeah, but the University of Central Florida, they are largely online. They do a lot of online stuff. They've done a lot of research, and so they have a scholarship on this topic. So it's good. So these are all project management style roles. Another way to think about this is if your students are interested in something, or if they have their own personal skills to bring into a thing. I'm thinking of a group project that the Intro Bio 152 class did, where they said, let's create some tutorials, video tutorials. And everybody's seen the biology tutorials, right, where the diagram is up and you're supposed to look at something and then wait for the bing and then it goes to the next thing. And they're terrible, awful often badly designed things. So they created it and they did stop motion graphics and acted out how viruses invade other viruses and things like that. And it's some really amazing stuff. But it also lets students bring their own personal interests into the group. And one of the best examples of this is there was a music student who was in the intro bio class, and this was just sort of an elective sort of thing that they had to take. Ended up finding the composer to that movie where everybody, all the land folds up on each other and they go in the dream inside the dream. Inception, right. Contacted, remember that theme song? It was like dun 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 dun. We contacted the composer in person, made a personal connection in their area of interest, got the rights to use that. So they have this very fun stop motion construction paper stop motion thing with this really amazing dramatic music to it. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is how cells work. It lets people bring their skills in ways that this does not capture, right? And that's kind of, then they feel some ownership of it in a way that is deeply personalized, often in ways that we wouldn't even have any idea about. But if we are able to create situations that let them do that, now we've engaged people that would never be engaged.
So I don't assign roles per se, but since I design partnerships at the beginning of the semester, and then they work in groups of 4 for the second half, but they're with the same partner. So I haven't tried CATME yet, but CATME, you can have them all get a link, and you can pick what topics you want the survey to ask them, and then all the students get a link, and then it has some awesome algorithm that makes groups. It costs money now, as far as you know.
It costs money now, a little bit of money.
But you have to like get your department to pay for it, and I don't want to do that. So I have just like a worksheet, a survey, but I have a similar thing where I say, here are some types of roles. I think it's like, do you consider yourself a manager? Are you good at organization, communication, time management, being prepared? There's like 6 or 7 things. So I have them say, what are the top 3 they see in themselves, and what are the top 3 they would want in a partner? And then I put it all into Excel, and I spend 2 hours making groups that afternoon. But then I also have, what grade do you hope to get in this class? Because I don't want to put 2 people who are like, I'm happy with a C as a partner. And then I say, are you a leader, a co-leader, or a follower? Like something like that. So I don't want to put someone who considers themselves a leader and a pure follower together. So most of them identify as co-leaders, but occasionally you get someone who's a follower and a leader, and you also almost don't want to put 2 people that consider themselves a true leader together. So it's all like just me picking things, but
Based on data.
Since I started doing that, I've had far fewer conflicts. Everyone seems, and I think when you tell them like we're gonna make groups and it's gonna be based on this and it's gonna be awesome because you're gonna pick your partner essentially. That really like they take that to heart, because I had a student last semester who ended up being by herself because I had a number of students. And at one point she came and talked to me, she's like, I'm just bummed because I was so excited to get like a perfectly matched partner, and so I kind of like worked out a 3-person group. But they kind of take that to heart. The more you tell them what to do, the more they kind of buy into it.
And that's under the idea of expectations, right? We're setting expectations. I think there's power there. One of the things that, and I guess just as another side, you don't happen to want to share that survey and
Oh, yeah.
thoughts that you sent me, that I can
Yeah, I could definitely.
Because I'm gonna guess that you spent a lot of time creating that survey.
I mean, it was similar where I kind of looked up group roles and then I give them like a brief description of the roles. And I think that helps them. Yeah.
All right, so check back on the activity sheet, the digital copy, in a couple of days or weeks, sometime later this semester, maybe
I can send it to
next
you when I
year.
get back to it.
And we'll have some work already done for you. Are any of you familiar with the discussion project here on campus? Have you gone through the training? All right, so they talk a lot about how to create groups and how to balance groups. And, you know, they want somebody with this kind of knowledge and this kind of knowledge in the same group. As you were talking, I started thinking about, yeah, there are some questions that, and they might be different questions for every topic, but there's a lot about setting up a discussion that you want people to engage in, setting rules for the discussion, setting rules for the group, and some of those rules can be sort of set up with the title, so don't just say you're the project manager, but you're the project manager does da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You're the timekeeper, or whatever the other one is. So that's, yeah, those are other good ideas. Are there any other takeaways from the discussion project that you'd be interested in sharing, Sarah? As far as-
No, I just had my packet, but I think I left it in my car. They did have another like group sorting that I think is free. I think you had to participate to get the link.
Yeah,
But yeah, it was something similar. Like you could kind of set up the questions however you wanted, and then you could ask the computer to sort based on people with similar interests or with opposing interests, or skills or whatever. So yeah, they did have a free tool similar to this. And then off the top of my head, other than one thing they did mention is they, when they had group type work, they sometimes ask the students to come up with their own list of rules first, or like as a class, right? So then they have a little bit of
buy-in,
yeah,
ownership.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
rather
I'm
than
more
just
apt to
throwing out
follow
the
it.
rules. Mhm.
If it's not imposed on me, but I help create it.
Right.
Yeah, again, really good.
Contract.
Yeah.
Or contract, yeah.
Well, I've heard also, not just rules, but like, here's what we'll do if someone's not participating, or like,
Mhm,
here's
that's
how
great.
we'll kind of.
Just sounds like professional. We just did this yesterday at a meeting.
But maybe it helps to have guidance.
It is, right? And
It's real life.
we want them to learn that for our area. So yeah, what does professional practice look like? And telling them that we're doing this, and you know, sometimes group work is hard, but we're doing this because if you go into this, this is what will be expected of you. This is authentic to our field, our discipline. This is what you need to do to succeed.
I have actually a quick question for you about when you were talking about your survey and like you don't want to pair two students who are hoping for a C together. What is your rationale? Because my first thought is I would stick them together so they don't drag down somebody else by being a slacker if somebody wants an A.
Right, I mean, that is a good.
I mean, I'm just curious because maybe it's worked well and that the A person pulls up the C person. So
I
I'm
think
curious.
it's tricky. Part of it is it's a lab class, so if I have two people who don't care, that's really hard to manage from just like me getting them to do their work in the class. So if at least one person in the partnership is like getting things done, it's less work for us to like go do crisis management. And I don't know, I have like a growth mindset sort of that like I don't want, and the question is like, what grade are you hoping to get? Like, oh, I want a good grade, A/AB. I'd be okay with B, or like I just need a C in passing. So like, usually most people say A, B, or B, and like occasionally C. So I think it's more like I don't want to just have a group that's off doing nothing, because it's not great for me because I have to give them a bad grade, and it's not great for them because they just wasted their time in my class. So, and part of it is it's like a senior level capstone class, and most of the people do want to be there because they have to pick the class. But yeah, that is a good question. I think generally when I've had two students who were both flailing, which I had last semester, I ended up repartnering during the halfway point because I needed to create 2 3-person groups. And one of them did a lot better, and one of them brought the other group down. So it was kind of like, it's really hard to
Do you have students in your senior capstone project class who are like, yeah, I just want to get a C? That's the kind of thing that you're like, at this point, you should have A and B students. You
I
know?
got my job lined up.
Right. And, yeah, maybe.
That does happen sometimes. Or like I'm already going to whatever school, but they're generally pretty
There's an engineering professor who retired recently who talked about getting groups or pairing people up according to the grades that they are giving thus far. And he didn't put the 2 A people together, and he didn't put the 2 F people together, obviously. But he also didn't do the A and, the top and the bottom together. And I wish I could remember what algorithm sort of thing he did, but he split it up somehow so that it wasn't the C's together, because that would be where the middle is, but there was some sort of maybe the A was with the C and the, I don't
It's kind of
remember.
like if you put the leader with the follower, like it's not, you would put a leader with a co-leader or a co-leader with a follower. Like, you don't necessarily want to bring down that person, but
Right.
there's usually a happy middle. It's tricky to make groups, because you don't want anyone to fail as a partner.
And you don't want the novice expert sort of thing happening where the A student who totally gets it can't explain it to the
And they're just
person who's not
impatient.
getting it. They're just, making them feel bad about,
So does everybody in your group get the same group grade then, or do you do individual?
ooh, let's talk about assessment of groups.
Yeah.
Good.
That is the part that is still an ongoing part of figuring out grading for the class. But I do, at the end, they have, they do the course eval, but then there's a self and group assessment that, there's a couple numbers to check off, but then, rate yourself in the group. What are the skills each person brought? And then with the group projects, I do ask how other people contributed. And I tell them upfront, as a part of the rubric for the poster, for example, it says, you'll get points knocked off if you're not participating equally. It's not a perfect system, it's a work in progress, but yeah, my class is definitely heavily weighted towards group projects because a lot of their time is spent working on that. And so I feel like if you do well by the end, you should get a good grade because you spent all that time. But yeah, we part of it is we use participation as a, clearly weren't participating and doing all that, so we can take more of your participation away, and that kind of helps.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to get lessons to in my class.
That's where I struggled with the collaboration feature, because, so I was having them put their content into a Google Doc, and I thought, well, I can see who contributed what, where within the doc. The problem was, like a lot of their meeting might have been done over Skype or Zoom in conversation, and then one person wrote it up. It wasn't that the other person didn't contribute ideas. And so I did do a peer rubric so that they could share what they thought as far as the contributions of their other team members, but it did get really hard to manage.
And Eric, you talked about your faculty not wanting to do the peer assessment stuff.
Yeah, and it was strange because it was mostly based on they didn't know if they could trust. Maybe they were worried maybe 3 group members were going to gang up on another one,
Right.
And give them all bad.
Not unheard of.
Yeah, so that's what I think they were most concerned about, is that they really don't know if maybe there was other motives behind the peer review.
Well, I think that's where having a class group time, even if the big practice is possible, helps, because I always tell them, yeah, I'm gonna have you evaluate each other, but we're also watching. So don't, we will, if that situation occurs, we'll know, because we've seen we've seen at least somewhat of what you're doing. So that's hard to do when everything's outside of class. You have to really know.
And the multiple touch points or multiple points of assessment where they're each individually handing in pieces, so you can see the quality of work that they do. And then when their peer assessment comes in, especially balanced also with their self-assessment, you can look at those two and what they've already handed in, get a better understanding, I think, of it. Does anyone else have ideas on assessing participation?
Can you go back to that CATME page that you had up there, because I just was poking around on it, and there's a peer evaluation.
Yeah.
And it has something kind of interesting, Eric, that where it talks about just that. If you keep scrolling down a little bit more too, is understand what is happening in student teams, and it talks about the different ones. And then if you scroll down a little bit more, contributing to teams' work. This was really interesting, the description of the ratings and where they can kind of fall each person in. So I want to look at this deeper, but it kind of gets at what you were talking about too.
Can we make sure that we add the CATME page to the,
I think
Is
it's
it
on
already-
there under the class
link to
labs.
great. Yes, and we've had an active teaching lab on CATME. And the instructor who was the presenter there was very working, was very very enthusiastic about it. There's actually a CAPME, I want to say user group on campus. Kurt Seidel, Michael McGuire, and so he, Duncan Carl Smith in physics, and I don't know who all else, but people who have used it and can dig into it like that.
So is this a campus-wide tool?
It is not a campus-wide tool. In physics, the physics department is paying for it, and I don't want to say anything beyond that, but I think that there are other ways to use.
I think it was free, and then they started licensing it, like right when we presented it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's based on how many students you're gonna be using with it a year. So, and then your like department gets like a license, but I only have 40 students this semester, and this is the only undergrad class my department teaches, so I don't think they'd be that interested. It seemed like it was reasonable, but I just haven't bothered with it. But from what what she talked about,
And the principles behind it, there's a lot actually on this that you're pointing out right now. That you could probably learn a lot even without using the tool, and what questions to ask and things like that. So.
On that site, the TUPR site, there's an article called Group Evaluation. And they have some examples you can download of anything from like kind of an open-ended question to a survey. If you just search for group evaluation. Like I think depending on the class, like it could just be like a survey that students just answer a survey against where they evaluate each other instead of having to write something that's really extensive. So it really depends on the activity. So so like this one is definitely more involved, but they have another example which is like a Google survey basically. Pick the radio button.
The other that reminded me for my survey, one of the questions is like describe the best qualities of your teammates, and I tell them that I save those for letters of rec. So I can go back
That's a
and
good
say like,
motivator.
I saw this, and also the lab, their partners saw.
Oh, that's
like,
really
this,
good
this,
idea.
And so one is good for me because I have terrible memory. Like I remember people, but I don't remember the details. So having your partners, I think, making it as much as possible like we're in this together, and there's benefits beyond just doing this class. That has been super. I just go through.
And also the say something positive about. So it's not just a.
I don't crap on people.
Right.
That's how it's for.
And if you don't say something positive, if you can't find something positive, then your grade is affected. You have to find, and early on, encourage them to bring to make that.
So I can tell if it's just like good interpersonal skills versus like they were a good leader and communicator and all these other things. So.
We are out of time. We are actually past time. If there were any things that you missed, we have a room till I think 2:30. So stick around and ask me. Otherwise, thank you for coming. I thought this was a pretty good discussion for the amount of ice that there is on the sidewalks outside. Thank you for braving that. So get home and be safe for us today. And on your way out, if you drop this inside that basket over there, that would be great. Thank you very much.
You just come from outside.
Yeah. Tomorrow morning we've got another lab. So come early.
Yeah, no, right. Sleeping bag right here.
Yeah, the
We're
sidewalk.
talking about programming. Things like our storyline.
Granted, I only have to make it from there to. Okay.